If you love royal jewelry, you have almost certainly heard the name Grand Duchess Vladimir. Her collection wasn't just impressive, it was a rival court in diamond form, vast enough to challenge the Empress herself. Today, pieces of her legacy are everywhere. You've seen her famous tiara on Queen Elizabeth II. Her sapphires crowned the Queens of Romania. Her emeralds ended up with American heiresses like Barbara Hutton, and some say even touched Hollywood legend. But how many of us truly know the woman behind the jewels? Who was this Grand Duchess who plotted coups over tea and built a jewelry empire that outlasted the Romanov dynasty itself? In this video, we are opening the personal vaults of Maria Pavlovna to trace how her treasures traveled from revolutionary Russia in battered bags to the most exclusive collections in the world. It is a story of ambition, survival, and a legacy that simply refused to disappear. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. To understand why Maria Pavlovna collected jewelry with such aggressive magnificence, we have to look at who she was before she ever set foot in Russia. She began life as Princess Marie of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. Her family affectionately called her Mishin. Her relationship with precious gems started remarkably early, almost as if she were being trained for her future role. When she turned just 1 year old, her father gifted her 2 loose pearls. It became a steady tradition. By the time she was 8, she lost her mother and inherited her entire jewelry box. So, even as a young girl, Mishin understood the cool, tangible weight of personal adornment. When she met Grand Duke Vladimir, the son of Emperor Alexander II, she was captivated. But she was also stubborn. Russian tradition demanded she convert to Orthodoxy. Mishin flatly refused. She held on to her Lutheran faith so tightly that marriage negotiations dragged on for 2 years. Eventually, the Tsar himself had to yield. She married Vladimir in 1874, retaining her own religion. It was a sharp signal. This was a woman who could bend the rules of the Russian Empire. But once she arrived in St. Petersburg, she faced a harsh reality check regarding her rank. At that time, the hierarchy was rigid. At the top was the reigning Empress, Maria Alexandrovna. Second was the heir's wife, the popular Maria Fyodorovna. That left Maria Pavlovna as the third lady of the empire. For a woman of her immense ambition, being third was intolerable. The friction began almost immediately, especially with her sister-in-law, Maria Fyodorovna, known as Minnie. When Minnie became Empress, the gap between them widened. Minnie was beloved but socially conservative. Maria Pavlovna, on the other hand, was boldly fashionable, unapologetically German, and fiercely independent. She frequently ignored the Emperor Alexander III's direct wishes, traveling abroad when he preferred her to stay, and spending lavishly when he preached austerity. I have to admit, while her behavior was certainly provocative, you can't help but be impressed by her sheer audacity. She simply refused to recognize anyone's authority over her own life. The rivalry between the two women became legendary. At one court ball, Empress Maria Fyodorovna publicly commented on Maria Pavlovna's appearance, saying loud enough to be heard, "God knows what she looks like. She is so red one might think she drinks." For a woman as proud as Maria Pavlovna, this was a slap in the face she never forgave. If she couldn't command the court by rank, she would conquer it by creating a better one. She established her own alternative court at the Vladimir Palace. It became the center of St. Petersburg's true aristocratic life, more fun, more intellectual, and far more open than the stiff imperial court. Her word in the drawing rooms was often quoted more frequently than the Tsar's own decrees. When the young Nicholas II married Alexandra Fyodorovna in 1894, Maria Pavlovna saw a new opportunity. Initially, she didn't hate the new empress. In fact, she tried to take the shy, inexperienced Alex under her wing, hoping to mentor and perhaps control her. But Alexandra, who despised the frivolous society life that Maria Pavlovna represented, coldly rejected her help. That rejection turned Maria Pavlovna from a potential ally into a sharp-tongued critic. She began to openly criticize the imperial couple, further cementing her position as the head of the opposition. Make no mistake, Maria Pavlovna's jewelry collection wasn't just about vanity. It was armor. It was her way of saying to both Maria Fyodorovna and Alexandra, "I may not wear the crown, but I am the true queen of this society." To understand the sheer visual power Maria Pavlovna wielded in St. Petersburg, you really have to look at the foundation of her jewelry collection. When she married into the Romanov family, she didn't just receive gifts, she was showered with an avalanche of wealth designed to secure dynasties. The ledgers from the time are almost difficult to comprehend. Her future mother-in-law, Empress Maria Alexandrovna, ordered a diamond riviere for her weighing 238 carats. There were emerald diadems, 5-row pearl necklaces with heavy sapphire clasps, and bracelets set with portraits of her new husband under large, flat diamonds. The gifting didn't stop after the wedding. In the Russian imperial family, the birth of a child was marked with significant jewels. With the christening of each of her 4 sons and her only daughter, Maria Pavlovna's jewelry boxes grew heavier with ruby pendants, sapphire earrings, and diamond brooches. It was a calculated accumulation of capital, worn directly on the body. But when you look past the astronomical ledgers and the blinding glare of hundreds of carats, you find pieces that carried an entirely different kind of weight. One of her most prized possessions was actually quite modest compared to the great Rivieres. It was a Sévigné-style brooch shaped like a serpent, set with 3 flat bouton pearls and a single pear-shaped pearl pendant. It wasn't a new commission. She inherited it directly from Empress Maria Alexandrovna in 1880, a woman who had worn it constantly until her death. In ancient European and Slavic traditions, the snake is a quiet protector of the household and a keeper of knowledge. Maria Pavlovna seemed to deeply appreciate this ancient symbolism, and she wore this specific pearl serpent frequently, often pinning it to her bodice when she wore her famous tiara of 15 interlocking diamond circles. While the Romanov family provided the foundation of her collection, it was Paris that truly shaped her taste. Maria Pavlovna traveled frequently and had the limitless funds required to patronize the greatest European jewelry houses. She was not a woman who simply bought what was in the window. She directed her jewelers with a very firm hand. Many of these Romanov jewels were created in the same era as the Victorian and Edwardian pieces that survive on the antique market today. I've added a link in the description to a gallery of genuine antique jewelry if you'd like to see similar historical pieces. It would be unfair, however, to view her solely as a woman obsessed with diamonds and court intrigue. Maria Pavlovna possessed a formidable executive mind. When the Russo-Japanese War broke out, and later World War I, she didn't just sit in her palace. She organized sanitary trains and equipped them with everything needed for the wounded. She created flying automobile units to deliver medical aid directly to the battlefields. She even established a linen warehouse in her palace, forcing the ladies of St. Petersburg to work for the front. She was awarded the St. George Medal for her efforts. She was a complicated figure, vain and ambitious, yes, but also capable of immense practical work when the country demanded it. In 1900, she commissioned Cartier to create a wide choker made of 6 thick strings of pearls. But it is the clasp that reveals her mindset. Instead of a traditional geometric lock, the choker fastened with 2 large imperial double-headed eagles, completely paved in diamonds. It is a remarkably assertive design choice. She was physically wrapping the ultimate symbol of Russian imperial authority right around her own throat. Her husband, Grand Duke Vladimir, understood exactly how to cater to her evolving, highly sophisticated Parisian tastes. To mark their 25th silver wedding anniversary in 1899, he presented her with a diamond aigrette. Nearly a decade later, in 1908, she decided it was time for a transformation. She took that sentimental anniversary gift to Cartier and had them remake it into a contemporary masterpiece, the cascading waterfall tiara. It contained over 75 carats of diamonds, but its true value was in the mechanics. Cartier's craftsmen used briolette-cut diamonds, suspending them on delicate platinum threads so they would vibrate and tremble, en tremblant, with her every breath and movement. You can almost imagine the soft, icy clatter of the stones. As she walked, the diamond drops caught the candlelight exactly like water shaken from a reed stem. Among the many jewels in her possession, one stood apart not only for its brilliance, but for its structure. Commissioned from the Russian court jeweler Bolin around the time of her wedding, the Vladimir tiara is a marvel of late 19th century engineering. The design features 15 interlocking diamond circles set in a mix of silver and gold. Inside each of these brilliant loops hung a large, pear-shaped pearl. She wore this tiara frequently for her official portraits. We will certainly return to this specific tiara later on. Its journey, from a hidden wall safe in St. Petersburg to the head of Queen Elizabeth II, is an entirely separate story, completely reliant on a few incredibly narrow escapes. But diamonds and pearls were merely the baseline for Maria Pavlovna. Her colored stones were of a magnitude that is genuinely difficult to wrap your mind around. As a wedding gift, she received a suite of emeralds that carried the heavy weight of Russian history. Among them was a massive 107-carat step-cut emerald brooch that had once belonged to Catherine the Great herself, along with another colossal 100-carat hexagonal emerald. She knew exactly how to deploy these historical weapons. In 1903, the imperial court hosted a legendary costume ball, with the guests dressed as 17th-century Russian nobles. Maria Pavlovna had that 100-carat hexagonal stone, along with several heavy cabochons, physically sewn directly into the front of her immense velvet headdress. She then pinned Catherine the Great's brooch right at the center of her heavily embroidered neckline. The sheer physical toll of supporting hundreds of carats of historical emeralds on your head and chest for an entire evening must have been exhausting, yet she carried it with rigid, absolute pride. To give you a sense of just how vast this collection had become, we have a wonderfully revealing account from the American heiress Consuelo Vanderbilt, the Duchess of Marlborough, who visited St. Petersburg in 1902. Consuelo remembered that after a grand dinner, the Grand Duchess led her into her private dressing room. There, Maria Pavlovna had her jewels laid out inside illuminated glass display cases. Entire parures of diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and pearls were presented exactly as they would be in a national museum. And inside those glass cases sat a fascinating variety of designs. She owned a classic diamond fringe tiara, a traditional shape given to Romanov Grand Duchesses. It was a piece of pure, icy geometry. I want you to remember this specific tiara. While most of the treasures we discussed today were sold or lost to history, this diamond fringe was destined for a different fate. But looking at her collection around 1908, Maria Pavlovna decided that classic was no longer enough. She wanted modern. She felt the fashion shifting towards the grandiose style of Cartier, and she made the drastic decision to dismantle her older, outdated parures to create something entirely new. She started her transformation in 1908 with a stone that most Romanovs were terrified of: rubies. There had long been a lingering superstition within the Russian court that the deep, blood-red color of rubies was a harbinger of misfortune or tragedy. Maria Pavlovna, predictably, had absolutely no time for such folklore. She took a chaotic assortment of older jewels, 14 diamond pins, necklaces, and a horseshoe brooch to Cartier in Paris. She ordered them dismantled to build a completely new, imposing ruby kokoshnik, centered around a 5-carat ruby once owned by Empress Josephine. The resulting ruby kokoshnik, surrounded by pear-shaped diamonds and oval ruby cabochons. The rubies certainly did not bring Maria Pavlovna any personal ruin, but the ultimate fate of this magnificent tiara remains one of the great mysteries of her collection. But the most profound shift in her life and her collection came a year later. In February 1909, Grand Duke Vladimir passed away. While widowhood diminished the influence of many women in that era, for Mishin, it brought an extraordinary level of financial independence. She inherited his staggering pension of 1 million gold francs a year. With her husband gone, and her pockets incredibly deep, she set out to settle an old score. She had long coveted a specific sapphire kokoshnik belonging to her late mother-in-law, Empress Maria Alexandrovna. Mishin fully expected to inherit it, but through a series of family pass-downs, the tiara was given to the wife of another Grand Duke instead. Maria Pavlovna was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She packed up her own collection of loose Romanov sapphires, including an enormous 137.2-carat cushion-cut stone and several large cabochons that originally belonged to Charlotte of Prussia, the wife of Tsar Nicholas I, and took the train to Paris to see her friend Louis Cartier. Cartier happened to have a grand, all-diamond kokoshnik already sitting in his vault. They agreed to adapt its rigid arches to hold her massive sapphires. Of course, a tiara of that magnitude required supporting players. To complete her new sapphire armor, she purchased a massive divan de corsage, a stomacher designed to be pinned across the entire front of a formal bodice. She selected another large stock piece from Cartier, but the original design featured pearls. She immediately ordered the pearls stripped out and replaced with more of her deep blue sapphires. Speaking of sapphires, her collection went far beyond just the massive tiaras. She also possessed a refined sapphire brooch and matching earrings created by the workshop of Bolin. Unlike the massive kokoshnik which went to her son, these specific pieces were inherited by her daughter, Elena. Remarkably, they survived the century-long storm of history intact. Just recently, in 2021, this brooch and earrings surfaced at a Sotheby's auction in Geneva, still resting in a custom red leather box stamped with the Greek royal crown. A quiet, sparkling reminder that not all Romanov treasures were lost to the revolution. The Grand Duchess had the distinct, somber honor of being the very last Romanov to escape Russia. She had fled to the Caucasus when the revolution erupted in 1917, leaving the bulk of her staggering collection locked inside a hidden wall safe in her bedroom at the Vladimir Palace in Petrograd. It was a terrifying gamble. The story of how those jewels escaped is one of the great capers of the 20th century. In the late summer of 1917, her son, Grand Duke Boris, enlisted the help of an aristocratic British art dealer and diplomat named Bertie Stopford. Stopford was a fixture in St. Petersburg society, and Maria Pavlovna trusted him implicitly. Disguised as workmen, though some accounts suggest Stopford wore a woman's dress to slip past the guards, the two men snuck into the heavily monitored Vladimir Palace. With the help of a loyal servant, they located the secret door in her boudoir, dismantled the tiaras and necklaces, wrapped the heavy stones in old newspapers, and stuffed them into two shabby Gladstone bags. Stopford then carried millions of rubles worth of Romanov history across the heavily mined North Sea, depositing the battered bags in a safety deposit box in London. Maria Pavlovna herself did not escape until February 1920, boarding an Italian steamer just ahead of the Bolshevik advance. The ordeal utterly broke her health, and she died in France merely months later in September 1920. There is a touching, almost prophetic detail about her passing. Maria Pavlovna died in the French town of Contrexeville. Years earlier, in 1914, she had used her own funds to build an Orthodox church there, the Church of St. Vladimir, to honor her late husband. She never could have guessed then that this small church in a foreign spa town would become her own final resting place, far away from the St. Petersburg palaces she ruled over for so long. Before her death, she made a very specific decision about how her rescued collection would be divided among her 4 children. It was largely a division by the Great Stones. Grand Duke Boris received the emeralds. Grand Duke Andrei was given the rubies. Grand Duke Kirill inherited the massive sapphire parure with the kokoshnik. And her only daughter, Grand Duchess Elena Vladimirovna, who had become Princess Nicholas of Greece, inherited the diamonds and pearls, along with a few personal favorites, like those exquisite sapphire earrings we mentioned earlier. Faced with the harsh, immediate financial realities of exile, Elena Vladimirovna had to make agonizing decisions. She needed cash, and she needed it quickly. She decided to sell some of the most important pieces she had just inherited. Fortunately, she found a highly motivated buyer who fully understood the historical weight of what she was offering. Queen Mary of the United Kingdom. In 1921, Queen Mary purchased the famous Vladimir tiara of interlocking diamond circles. The journey from Russia had not been kind to it. An inventory taken by Garrett in London noted that the tiara had been damaged, with several diamonds and pearls missing. Queen Mary immediately had it repaired. A few years later, in 1924, she made a brilliant, highly personal alteration. She had the tiara adapted so that Maria Pavlovna's original pear-shaped pearls could be swapped out for 15 large cabochon emerald drops that belonged to Mary's own family, the Cambridge Emeralds. This single alteration ensured the Vladimir tiara would become one of the most versatile and frequently worn diadems of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Mary didn't stop with the tiara. She also purchased a spectacular diamond riviere that Elena had inherited. This was the same necklace, composed of 38 massive diamond collets, that had been bought abroad by Empress Maria Alexandrovna for Maria Pavlovna's wedding decades earlier. Queen Mary, ever the innovator, had the riviere completely reset by A. Cincinich in 1928 into a long, dramatic diamond sautoir. It was a clever piece of engineering that could be broken down into 2 shorter necklaces and 2 bracelets. However, not every piece Elena inherited found such a high-profile second life. Along with the tiara, she received a magnificent pearl necklace with heavy, suspended pearl drops. While Queen Mary eagerly bought the tiara, she passed on the necklace. Sadly, that magnificent string of pearls has never reappeared in public. It was likely broken up and sold quietly to sustain her family in exile. But Elena Vladimirovna did manage to hold on to a few key pieces. What she did with those remaining jewels is a surprisingly touching story of a mother trying to preserve a sliver of her family's legacy for her own daughters. While Elena negotiated in London, her brother Kirill and his wife, Victoria Melita, Ducky, faced similar desperation. They had inherited the massive sapphire parure, but had no funds to live on in exile. Ducky, however, had a distinct advantage. Her sister was the famous Queen Marie of Romania. Queen Marie had lost her own jewelry collection during the war and was eager to rebuild it. She stepped in to save her sister's family, purchasing the towering sapphire kokoshnik for herself. It was a transaction driven by both sisterly devotion and sheer admiration for the stones. In a remarkably candid letter to her mother, Queen Marie admitted it felt strange to profit from her relative's misfortune, but she couldn't resist the quality of the gems, writing, "Thank God that the jewels of the old lady are fabulous. She was an extraordinarily greedy woman, but heaven, these jewels are wonderful." It was the perfect solution. The money saved Kirill's family, and the tiara found a new royal home, where it was worn with theatrical flair at the Romanian court. Queen Marie purchased the towering Cartier sapphire kokoshnik for herself. It perfectly suited her highly theatrical fairy tale aesthetic, and she wore it constantly, even choosing it for her spectacular coronation in 1922. She didn't stop there. She also arranged for the Romanian government to purchase Maria Pavlovna's heavy cabochon sapphire earrings to give as a gift to her daughter-in-law, Princess Helen of Greece. Those very same earrings, decades later, would be purchased by Queen Frederica of Greece when Helen herself fell on hard times. It is a constant, quiet reshuffling of wealth among a very small group of exiled women. The sapphire kokoshnik eventually passed to Queen Marie's daughter, Princess Ileana, who guarded it through decades of war and displacement. By 1950, living in exile and destitute, Ileana famously carried the 137-carat sapphire to America, wrapped simply in her nightgown for safety, to sell it back to Cartier. It was a heartbreaking but necessary sacrifice. As she later wrote, the tiara was splendid, but it could neither feed nor clothe her children. When Grand Duke Boris inherited his mother's emeralds, he tried desperately to hold on to them. His wife, Zinaida, was even photographed wearing the colossal 107-carat Catherine the Great emerald brooch in the late 1920s. But eventually, the mounting debts of exile forced his hand. He sold the great 100-carat hexagonal emerald necklace to Cartier in 1922. From there, it entered the world of unimaginable American wealth. Cartier transformed the piece into a long sautoir for the eccentric heiress Edith Rockefeller McCormick. After her death, the stones were purchased by Barbara Hutton, a woman whose appetite for historical jewels was practically insatiable. Hutton eventually had the emeralds remounted into a heavy, yellow-gold oriental tiara in 1947. By 1966, Hutton grew tired of the piece and sold it to Van Cleef & Arpels. What happened to the stones after that remains a frustrating mystery. You will often hear a very persistent rumor that these specific Romanov emeralds were later purchased by Richard Burton for Elizabeth Taylor, ending up in her famous Bulgari necklace. It is a wonderfully glamorous theory, but jewelry historians have firmly debunked it. Elizabeth Taylor's emeralds have an entirely different origin. Maria Pavlovna's 100-carat stone was likely recut to a smaller size and swallowed up by private collectors. The rubies met a similarly quiet end. Grand Duke Andrei sold the Cartier ruby kokoshnik shortly after his mother's death. It was purchased by Princess Anastasia of Greece, a woman who was born Nancy Leeds and possessed an immense American fortune from her first marriage. She bought the tiara as a lavish wedding gift for her new daughter-in-law, Princess Xenia Georgievna of Russia, in 1921. Xenia wore the heavy, octagonal ruby to a ball at the Plaza Hotel in New York in 1927. After her divorce in 1930, the tiara simply vanished from the public record. Happily, not every piece of Maria Pavlovna's collection was sold to strangers. A few very personal items remained tightly within the grip of her descendants, and they are still worn today. Grand Duchess Elena, who had sold the Vladimir tiara to Queen Mary, managed to save a handful of specific treasures for her own daughters. Among them were 3 large, pear-shaped pearl drops that had originally belonged to her mother. Elena passed these to her daughter, Princess Marina, who became the Duchess of Kent. Today, those exact pearls are frequently worn by Princess Michael of Kent. She wears them with remarkable creativity, using different configurations for the earrings, and often attaching the 3rd pearl as a pendant to a variety of necklaces and brooches. Elena also kept her mother's classic diamond fringe tiara. Instead of selling it, she gave it to her middle daughter, Princess Elizabeth, when she married into the Bavarian Turing-Jettenbach family in 1934. This piece, with its sharp, icy spikes of old mine diamonds, has become a cherished bridal tradition for the Habsburg descendants. We saw it on Archduchess Sophie in 1990, and again on Archduchess Maya in 2005. There is something deeply moving about seeing a young, modern bride walk down the aisle wearing the exact same diamond halo that Maria Pavlovna wore in the velvet-draped halls of St. Petersburg over a century ago. Even the smaller, everyday pieces occasionally surface to remind us of Maria Pavlovna's flawless taste. Just recently, a delicate pair of her antique turquoise and diamond earrings, passed down through the Yugoslavian royal family, appeared at a Christie's auction, fetching nearly £65,000. Looking at these stones today, resting on the velvet blocks of modern auction houses, it is almost impossible to fathom the sheer scale of the journey they have endured. Looking back at this incredible journey, it is impossible not to be awestruck by the sheer scale of Maria Pavlovna's wealth. Her jewelry box feels almost bottomless. Think about it. She was the very last Romanov to escape, yet she managed to carry out a collection vast enough to secure the survival of not just 1, but 4 exiled families. Every single tiara, every sapphire, every emerald we've talked about today eventually became a lifeline in a new, unfamiliar world. And what is truly remarkable is how much of it has survived. From the Vladimir tiara shining on the late Queen Elizabeth II to the delicate fringe tiara still worn by the brides of her family, these stones carry a piece of her history. They are fragments of a lost empire that simply refuse to disappear. And yet, one can't help but wonder, how many more treasures are still out there? Hidden in private vaults, lost in family attics, or resting in collections we simply haven't discovered yet? It is a fascinating thought. Which of these incredible pieces made the biggest impression on you today? Did this story change how you see the formidable Grand Duchess Vladimir? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed uncovering these royal secrets with me, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.